Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
Picture, if you will, a woman standing in the ruins of what she believed to be her perfectly ordered life. Lisa Watson, 35 years of age, stood in the echoing emptiness of what hadn't been her matrimonial home, watching the movers carry away the last vestiges of at-12-year marriage. The divorce papers lay scattered across the kitchen, counter like fallen leaves, each signature Asmal death, each legal phrase a nail in the coffin of dreams she'd carried since college. Richard had taken everything he could legally claim, the house they built together, half their savings, even the antique dining set her grandmother had left her. But he couldn't take what mattered most: her dignity, her intelligence, her capacity. To begin again, Lisa pressed her palms against the cool granite countertop and closed her eyes, feeling feet of silence settle around her like a shroud. 12 years. 12 years of birthday dinners where Richard talked only of his law practice, of anniversary celebrations that felt more like business meetings, of nights when she lay beside a man who saw her as an accessory to his success rather than a partner. In life, you see, dear one, sometimes the greatest tragedies disguise themselves as the greatest gifts. Lisa Watson was about to discover this truth in ways that would transform not just her circumstances, but the very essence of who she understood herself to be. The apartment she'd rented was a modest two-bedroom in the Arts District, a far cry from the suburban mansion she'd called home. But as she stood in the morning sunlight streaming through windows that were hers and hers alone, Lisa felt something she hadn't experienced in years: possibility. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a woman on the precipice of change. Auburn hair that had been kept in rigid professional styles now fell loose around her shoulders. Green eyes that had grown dull with compromise now sparked with something dangerous: hope. Lisa Watson, she said aloud, testing how her maiden name sounded in the empty space. Time to remember who you are. Asterisk 3 months had passed since that morning of reclamation, and Lisa threw herself into her work at Howard Enterprises with the fervor of someone who has discovered that professional success could fill the void left by personal disappointment. She was wrong, of course, but sometimes we need to exhaust one path before we're ready to see another. The corner office on the 32nd floor came with her promotion to VP of Marketing, a position she'd earned through brilliance, dedication, and perhaps most importantly, the clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose. The city sprawled below her windows like a glittering prose, each light representing a life, a dream, a story in progress. Mussa, the quarterly projections are incredible, her assistant Marcus announced, setting a stack of reports on her mahogany desk. Your digital campaign increased engagement by 300%. She nodded, though the numbers felt hollow. Success, she was learning, was a curious thing. It filled the bank account but left the soul surprisingly empty. But the universe, my child, has a way of placing exactly what we need in our path, precisely when we're ready to receive it. Though we often mistake readiness for accident. It was on a Saturday morning in late autumn that Lisa found herself wandering through the downtown flea market, drawn by an impulse she couldn't name. Perhaps it was the need to bear on things with history, objects that had been loved and used and carried meaning beyond their monetary value. The vendor stalls stretched like a colorful maze beneath the crisp October sky, filled with the scents of kettle corn and apple cider, the sounds of haggling and laughter. Lisa moved through it all like a woman in a dream, touching vintage jewelry and old books with reverent fingers, and then she saw her. Eleanor Johnson stood behind a table laden with handmade pottery, her calloused hands straddling a ceramic bowl with the reverence of someone who understood that creation was a form of prayer. She was perhaps 40, with silver threading through dark hair that she wore in a practical braid, and laugh lines that spoke of a life lived fully in the sunshine. "That's beautiful work," Lisa found herself saying, approaching the table. Eleanor looked up, and Lisa felt something shift in her chest. The woman's eyes were the color of rich earth, warm and steady and infinitely kind. "Thank you," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying the gentle cadence of someone who chose her words carefully. "I made it on my farm outside the city. There's something about working with clay that comes straight from your own land. ... Double quotes here, dear listener, is where our story truly begins." For what Lisa Watson experienced in that moment was not mere attraction, though attraction was certainly present. It was recognition, soul. calling to soul across the vast loneliness of human existence. They talked for an hour about pottery and farming, about the satisfaction of creating something with your own hands, about the ways city life could make you forget the rhythm of seasons. Eleanor spoke of her small farm with the passion others reserve for lovers, describing sunrise over cornfields and the contentment of knowing your food came from soil you tended yourself. Would you like to see it? Eleanor asked suddenly, then blushed as if the invitation had surprised even her. The farm, I mean. I'm having a small harvest festival next weekend. Nothing fancy, just friends and neighbors celebrating the end of growing season. Lisa should have said no. She had reports to review, presentations to prepare, the carefully ordered life of a successful executive to maintain. Instead, she heard herself say, I'd love that. And so it was that Lisa Watson, who had never owned so much as a houseplant, found herself driving rural roads toward a destiny she could never have imagined. Eleanor's farm existed in a pocket of the world that time seemed to have passed by with gentle indifference. 40 acres of rolling hills, vegetable gardens, and pastures where horses grazed in contentment that spoke of lives well lived. The farmhouse itself was a century old, its white clapboard siding weathered to a soft gray that blended seamlessly with the autumn landscape. Lisa parked her BMW beside pickup trucks and SUVs, feeling suddenly self-conscious about their designer jeans and expensive handbag. But Eleanor met her at the gate with a smile that erased all doubts. You came, she said simply, and in those two words Lisa heard a warmth that seemed to wrap around her like a beloved shawl. The harvest festival was everything Lisa's structured city life was not: chaotic, joyful, unpredictable. Children ran between the adults, their laughter mixing with the sound of acousticutors and easy conversation. Tables groaned under the weight of food grown on the very land where they stood, and mason jars of homemade cider caught the golden afternoon light. Eleanor moved through it all like a gracious hostess and skilled conductor, ensuring everyone felt welcome while somehow making Lisa feel as though she were the only guest who truly mattered. This is incredible, Lisa said as Eleanor showed her through the vegetable gardens, where the tomatoes still hung heavy on the vine. You did all this yourself? With help from friends and neighbors, Eleanor replied, kneeling to harvest the last of the season's carrots. That's how it works out here. Community. People taking care of each other. There are moments, child, when we glimpse a different way of being in the world. Moments when the life we've constructed reveals itself to be as fragile as spun glass, while something simpler and more authentic beckons from beyond the borders of our understanding. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold, Eleanor and Lisa found themselves alone on the farmhouse porch, sharing a bottle of wine that tasted of summers past and promises yet to be fulfilled. Can I ask you something? Eleanor said, her voice soft in the gathering twilight. Anything. What are you running from? The question should have offended Lisa, should have triggered her carefully constructed mess. Instead, it opened something in her chest like a door she hadn't known was locked. Everything, she whispered. A marriage that was slowly killing my spirit, expectations that never fit. A life that looked perfect from the outside but felt empty from the inside. Eleanor nodded as if she understood completely. I ran too once. Had a corporate job in Chicago, corner office, 6-figure salary. Thought success meant climbing someone else's ladder until I realized I was climbing away from who I actually was. Do you ever regret it, leaving all that behind? Eleanor's hand found hers in the darkness, warm and solid and utterly real. Every morning, hen, I wake up to roosters instead of traffic. When I eat eggs from my own chickens and watch sunrise over land, I tend with my own hands. No, I've never regretted choosing life over lifestyle. And there, in the sweet darkness of a country evening, with the scent of honeysuckle and the distant sound of crickets, Lisa Watson felt something awakening in her heart that she had known him for. Autumn surrendered to winter, and with it came a transformation in Lisa's world that she had neither expected nor planned for. What had begun as weekend visits to Eleanor's farm became a refuge from the increasingly meaningless demands of corporate success. Every Friday evening, she would drive those winding country roads toward something that felt increasingly like home. Eleanor taught her to tend the winter garden, to preserve the last harvest, to find beauty in the stark landscape of dormant fields. More importantly, she taught Lisa to slow down, to listen to the rhythm of seasons, to find satisfaction in simple tasks completed with attention and care. You're good at this, Eleanor observed one December afternoon as Lisa successfully repaired a section of broken fence. You have strong hands, capable hands. Lisa looked down at her manicured nails, now chipped and stained with honest work, and felt a pride she'd never experienced from closing $1 million marketing deals. But it was not just the work of the farm that was transforming Lisa, dear listener. It was the quiet intimacy of shared tasks, of conversations that meandered like country streams, of moments when their eyes met across the kitchen table and something electric passed between them. The night it happened was unremarkable. In its circumstances, a February snowstorm that had trapped Lisa at the farm, making the drive back to the city impossible. They had spent the evening by the fireplace, reading and talking and simply existing in each other's presence, when Eleanor looked up from her book and said something that changed everything. "Lisa," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them like snowflakes, delicate and profound and utterly transformative. Lisa felt her breath catch, her heart begin to race, every assumption she'd ever made about herself reorganizing in the space of a heartbeat. I. She began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Eleanor's confession meant. "I know. This might be complicated for you," Eleanor continued, her voice gentle but unwavering. "I know your experience has been with men. But what I feel for you, it's not something I can't pretend doesn't exist." Lisa stood and walked to the window, watching snow fall through the circle of light cast by Theppert's lamp. Behind her, she could feel Eleanor waiting, patient as spring earth waiting for seed. "Here, child, is where Lisa Watson faced the greatest choice of her life. Not between right and wrong, for the heart knows no such arbitrary boundaries, but between fear and courage, between the safety of the known and the terrifying beauty of the unknown. "I've never ... double quotes," Lisa said, her breath fogging the cold glass. "I know. I don't understand what's happening to me." "You don't have to understand it," Eleanor said, rising and coming to stand behind her. "You just have to decide whether you trust it." When Lisa turned, Eleanor was there, close enough to touch, close enough to breathe, and decent of wood smoke and lavender that always seemed to cling to her skin. And in that moment, with snow falling outside and firelight dancing on the walls, Lisa discovered that love was not a decision made by the mind, but a recognition made by the soul. Their first kiss was gentle, questioning, a conversation conducted in the language of touch. But when Lisa's arms came up to encircle Eleanor's neck, when she heard herself sigh against Eleanor's lips, she knew she was home in a way she had never been home before, and so it was that Lisa Watson, who had spent 35 years believing. She knew the shape of love, discovered that the heart's capacity for surprise was infinite. Astra's spring arrived early that year, as if nature itself were eager to witness the blossoming of Lisa's new understanding of herself. The farm awakened around them, crocuses pushing through snow, maple trees budding with tender green, the first brave daffodils nodding in the warming breeze. Lisa had been spending more time at the farm than in her city apartment, ostensibly to help with spring planting, but truthfully because she could no longer bear to be separated from Eleanor for long. Love, she was discovering, was both the most natural thing in the world and the most miraculous. But paradise, dear ones, is often interrupted by the harsh realities of the world we've left behind. The call came on a Tuesday morning in April, just as Lisa and Eleanor were transplanting those seedlings in the greenhouse. Marcus's voice on her cell phone carried an urgency that made her stomach clench with foreboding. "Lisa, you need to get to the office immediately. There's been an accusation about the Morrison campaign funds." "What kind of accusation?" "Embezzlement. They're saying you diverted campaign money into personal accounts. The FB wants to interview you this afternoon." The phone slipped from Lisa's numb fingers, clattering to the greenhouse floor among the scattered potting soil. Eleanor was beside her instantly, strong arms providing support as Lisa's knees threatened to give way. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite the concern in her eyes. "They're accusing me of stealing money. $3 million. From the Morrison account. Sometimes, child, the universe tests not our strength, but our faith. Not our ability to succeed, but our capacity to trust and love when the ground beneath our feet begins to crumble. The drive to the city passed in a blur of anxiety and disbelief. Lisa's mind raced through every transaction, every decision, every signature she'd authorized in the past year. The Morrison campaign had been her proudest achievement, a grassroots effort that had successfully inched a state senator's bid for Congress. Every penny had been accounted for, every expenditure justified and documented. Our associate thought, the FBI, Interview was a nightmare of fluorescent lights and suspicious questions. Agent Martinez and Agent Chen presented evidence that seemed damning. Transfers made from campaign accounts to a numbered account in the Cayman Islands, all bearing Lisa's electronic authoriation. Ms. Watson, Agent Martinez said, sliding documents. Across the metal table, these transfers totaled $3.2 million over a 6-month period. The account they were transferred to was open with your personal information. Lisa stared at the papers, her professional training warring with her personal. Shock. The signatures looked authentic, the authorization codes were correct, but she had never seen these transactions before in her life. This is impossible, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never authorized these transfers. I would never, Ms. Watson, Agent Chen interrupted. We've been investigating financial irregularities in political campaigns for 3 years. This is exactly the kind of sophisticated scheme we've come to expect from high-level executives who think they're too smart to get caught. And there, in that sterile room filled with accusation and doubt, Lisa Watson faced the possibility that everything she had built, her career, her reputation, her future with Eleanor, might be destroyed by crimes she had never committed. Asterisk. Eleanor Johnson had spent enough years as a forensic accountant to know that numbers, like people, could be made to lie with sufficient skill and motivation. When Lisa returned to the front that evening, shattered and exhausted from hours of interrogation, Eleanor was waiting with comfort food and a determination that burned like steady flame. Tell me everything, Eleanor said, settling Lisa on the couch with a mug of chamomile tea and a blanket that smelled of lavender and home. They have documents, bank records, authorization codes. Everything points to me, but Eleanor, I swear never, I believe you, Eleanor said simply, and those 3 words carried more weight than all the evidence the FBI had presented. Now tell me about your computer access, your passwords, who else had authority to make campaign transfers? This, dear listener, is what love looks like in its most practical form, not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but the steady willingness to stand beside someone when the world seems determined to tear them down. Eleanor spent the next 3 days transforming the farmhouse kitchen into a forensic accounting war room. Financial records covered every surface. Multiple computers hummed with analysis software, and the telephone rang constantly as she called in favors from former colleagues in Chicago. The transfers are sophisticated, Eleanor explained to Lisa. On Thursday evening, pointing to patterns she'd identified in the data. Whoever did this understands both your authorization proclocks and international banking laws. This isn't some junior accountant looking to make a quick score. Then who? Eleanor's expression grew grim. Someone with access to your systems, knowledge of your habits, and a very good reason to want you destroyed. The breakthrough came on Saturday morning, buried in metadata from Lisa's work computer. Eleanor's fingers flew across the keyboard as she traced the digital fingerprints left by whoever had used Lisa's credentials. Here, she said, her voice tight, with excitement and anger. The transfers were all made during times when your keycard shows you were physically out of the office. But look at this. Someone was accessing your computer remotely during those exact time periods. Remote access. But that requires administrative privileges. Someone in IT who could bypass normal security protocols. They stared at each other. Across the kitchen table, laden with evidence of conspiracy and betrayal. Daniel Morrison, Lisa whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place. He had root access to all campaign systems. And when I recommended against his proposal to expand digital adverting spend, he said I'd regret not trusting his vision. Revenge, dear child, is a poison that the bitter drink hoping to harm their enemies, never realizing they are the ones being destroyed from within. Eleanor gathered the evidence they'd assembled, bank records, computer logs, communication patterns. That painted a clear picture of Morrison's sophisticated embezzlement scheme. Lisa had been the perfect patsy, successful enough to be believable as a thief, naive enough not to notice the gradual infiltration of her digital life. We need to get this to the FBI immediately, Eleanor said. Will they believe us? I'm already their prime suspect. Eleanor took Lisa's hands in her own, calloused palms warm and reassuring. They'll believe the evidence. Numbers don't lie, even when people do. And so it was that Eleanor Johnson, who had fled the corporate world to find peace among growing things, found herself returning to that world as Lisa Watson's champion and protector. Asterisk, the FBI conference room looked exactly the same as it had the week before, but Lisa entered Ida's a different woman. Gone was the frightened executive who had stammered through accusations and denials. In her place sat someone who had learned that she was stronger than she knew, loved more deeply than she had imagined possible, and supported by a partner woes. Faith in her was unshakable, Agent Martinez reviewed Eleanor's evidence with the careful attention of someone who knew that careers, including his own, hung in the balance of this investigation. The financial analysis was thorough, the computer forensics irrefutable, the timeline of Morrison's activities a damning chronicle of betrayal and greed. This is extremely sophisticated work, Agent Chen admitted, studying printouts of bank transfers and network logs. How long did this analysis take you? 72 hours, Eleanor replied calmly. When someone you love is accused of crimes they didn't commit, you find reserves of energy you didn't know existed. Love, dear listener, is not merely an emotion, but a form of power. The power to see clearly when others are blinded by assumption, to work tirelessly when others surrender to despair, to stand firm when the ground beneath your feet is shifting like sand. The confrontation with Daniel Morrison 3 days later provided a fitting conclusion to this sordid affair. Faced with Eleanor's forensic evidence and the FBI's newfound interest in his financial activities, Morrison confessed to embezzling not just from Lisa's campaigns, but from 3 others over a 2-year period. I want to make a deal, he told his lawyer, sweat beading on his forehead as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. I'll give you everything, bank accounts, passwords, the whole network. Just please. My wife doesn't know about any of this. Lisa watched from the FBI office window as Morrison was led away in handcuffs, feeling not triumph but a profound sadness for the waste of it all. A man's career destroyed, multiple campaigns compromised, trust shattered, all for money that would never have brought him the happiness he was clearly seeking. How do you feel? Eleanor asked, slipping her hand into Lisa's. Free, Lisa said, and realized it was true in ways that went far beyond her legal vindication. And so it was that Lisa Watson, who had begun this chapter of her story as a victim of circumstances beyond her control, emerged from it as a woman who knew herself to be capable of weathering any storm, especially when she didn't face it alone. Astra's summer arrived at Eleanor's farm like a symphony in green and gold, the gardens bursting with vegetables that would feed them through the winter months ahead. Lisa had taken a leave of absence from Howard Enterprises after her vindication, ostensibly to recover from the trauma of false accusation, but truthfully to explore a question that had been growing in her heart, like tender seedlings reaching toward the sun. I've been offered the VP position at Morrison's firm, Lisa told Eleanor one evening as they sat in the porch watching fireflies begin their nightly dance. With Daniel gone, they need someone with experience in campaign finance. Eleanor's hands stilled on the ears of corn she was shucking. That's wonderful. That's everything you've worked for. Is it? Lisa turned in her chair to face the woman who had become her anchor, her safe harbor, her home. Because I've been thinking, what if I wanted something different? Sometimes, dear child, the most important conversations of our lives happen not in moments of crisis, but in the quiet spaces between one breath and the next, when our hearts are still and not to hear what our souls have been trying to tell us. Different how? Eleanor asked, though her eyes suggested she already knew. Different, like, what if I wanted to stay here? What if I wanted to learn to grow things instead of marketing campaigns? What if I wanted to build a life with someone who loves the smell of rain and summer soil more than the scent of success? Eleanor set aside the corn and moved to kneel beside Lisa's chair, taking her hands in her own. Are you sure? You'd be giving up everything you've worked for, everything that defines Lisa Watson, successful executive? But that's just it, Lisa said, tears she didn't know she'd been holding beginning to fall. I'm tired of being Lisa Watson, successful executive. I want to be Lisa Watson, beloved partner. Lisa Watson, tender of growing things. Lisa Watson, woman brave enough to choose love over expectations. Here, beloved listener, is the moment when Lisa Watson faced the choice that would define the rest of her life. Not between success and failure, but between someone else's definition of success and her own understanding of what it meant to live fully. Eleanor rose and disappeared into the farmhouse, returning with something small and precious cradled in her palms. It was a ring, not diamond or gold, but carved from a piece of oak that had once shaded the farmhouse, inlaid with tiny stones from the creek that ran through their land. I made this during those 3 days when you were fighting for your freedom, Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. I made it because I realized that somewhere between teaching you top-lent seeds and watching you discover who you really are, I had started planning a future that included you in every sunrise and every season. Lisa's breath caught as Eleanor slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, of course, because Eleanor had been paying attention to every detail of the woman she loved, memorizing her hands the way she memorized the cycles of planting and harvest. Lisa Watson, Eleanor said formally, will you do me the honor of becoming Lisa Johnson? Will you help me turn this farm into something that nurtures not just crops but dreams? Will you let me love you through every season for as long as the earth keeps turning? And there, in the gathering darkness of a perfect summer evening, with the sound of crickets and the scent of honeysuckle, and the promise of forever hanging in the air between them, Lisa Watson said yes to the most important question she would ever be asked. 1 year later, Lisa Johnson stood in what had once been Eleanor's farm, but was now truly theirs. A thriving organic operation that supplied 3 farmers' markets and had a waiting list of restaurants eager for their heirloom tomatoes and specialty herbs. The farmhouse had been expanded with rooms for the bed and breakfast they planned to open next spring, and the old barn had been converted into a workshop where Eleanor continued her pottery and Lisa had discovered a talent for furniture restoration. The Hendricks wedding wants 50 centerpieces. Lisa called from the greenhouse, where she was tending the succession plantings of flowers that would bloom throughout the summer wedding season. And the restaurant in town wants to discuss an exclusive contract for our microgreens. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, soil under her fingernails and satisfaction in her smile. Were we going to need to hire help if this keeps up? Good problems to have, Lisa replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Success, dear child, is not measured in the size of one's office or the digits in one's bank account, but in the depth of one's contentment and the richness of one's connections to the world and the people we love. The evening of their first anniversary found them exactly where they had shared their first kiss, on the farmhouse porch, watching the sun set over land they had tended together through an entire cycle of seasons. But now the porch held 2 rocking chairs instead of one, both worn smooth by evenings spent in companionable silence and comfortable conversation. Any regrets? Eleanor asked, the question that had become their ritual. Only that it took me 35 years to find you, Lisa replied, the answer that always made Eleanor smile. And so it was that Lisa Watson, who became Lisa Johnson, who transformed from corporate executive to farm owner, who discovered that the heart's capacity for love and reinvention was infinite, found her way home to herself, and to a life that fit her like skin dot in the distance. Their fields stretched green and prosperous under the stars that had witnessed every human story since time began. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new growth, new opportunities to nurture both crops and dreams. But tonight, they were exactly where they belonged, exactly who they were meant to be, surrounded by everything they had built together with their own hands and hearts. Sleep well, dear listener. Dream of second chances and the courage to plant new seeds, even when the old harvest has failed. Remember that it is never too late to become who you were always meant to be. Never too late to love with your whole heart. Never too late to choose a life that feeds your soul, instead of merely filling your bank account for in the end. We are all farmers of our own destinies, and the most beautiful gardens grow from soil enriched by the compost of our former selves.